All right, Shabbosai, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors. I'm sorry, just pull it up here. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Shindin Avram Kelman, for dedicating all the Shir and Drashos this month in honor of Yechiel's engagement to Alana Falik and in memory of our parents, their parents Jerome and Bernice Kelman, and Alexander and Federica David Zichronim Livracha. Barak, Maya, Sandy Hoffman, Dora Limas, and Avi Malamed for dedicating all the Shir and Drashos this month in memory of Ruvain ben Emmanuel, Zichronim Livracha, and Ayal Sarah Steinberg in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Shulamis Bas Susha, and the Daf Yomi in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Yehuda ben Michal. Our week of learning sponsors, Matt and Diane Marks, in honor of the birth and bris of their grandson Yehuda Yeshaya Marks. May he Emertz Hashem grow to an incredible Ben Torah and Emertz Hashem Torah l'chol b'lamaisim tovim ad mea ve'esim shanim tovos. And to thank Rabbi Yehuda Buchwalter for dedicating the shir this morning in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his mother, Rabbi Yehuda Fega Bas Ligua Bas Chaim Coin. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in a chala. With that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Always feels like we begin every shir with that line. A lot, but there is actually a lot to do today. So today's daf is Nun Ches 58. We are picking up at Nun Zayin base 57b, and we're picking up actually right pretty much in the middle of the daf, across from Tosfos My Lav. Right across from Tosfos My Lav. Amar Rav Huna. So Rav Huna says as follows: Bagra Yom Echad V'Niskatsha. So we'll say, remember again, the Mishnah introduced us to a very interesting idea, which is this concept that halacha l'maisa, that after erusin, from the time that the husband tells the wife, let's get married, like let's plan the wedding and move things forward, there's an amount of time that both husband and wife, we call them husband and wife because they already had erusin, that both husband and wife have to prepare themselves for the wedding. And we say prepare themselves literally, like take care of different needs of the wedding. So we said that for a basula, ultimately, again, it's 1 year. And for an almana, it's 30 days. Why the distinction? The distinction is because the basula needs all of this time to gather her tachshita, to gather the adornments, the accessories, the jewelry, the different things. An almana, or for that matter, a grusha, presumably already has these items on hand. So now Rav Huna introduces something else. What happens if a man is mekadesh a bogeres? Bogeres, I will say, so again, bogeres, full-fledged adults. So right, Reuben is Mekadesh Rachel. Rachel becomes Rachel is the Bogeres. In other words, the timeline here is important. Rachel becomes a Bogeres, then ultimately Reuben is Mekadesher. What's the halacha? No stinla shloshim kalmana. She only gets 30 days to prepare for the wedding, just like an almana. Now, I'll say, what's the pshat? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, it's in the short lines of Rashi, about 5 lines in. No stinla shloshim kalmana. Mishas irusin. Shekevan shebagra himachina tachshitin kodem bagros shenarotz lishos od. Now, this is fascinating because since a girl, it was interesting to note is since a girl once she reaches bagros, not that she's already considered to be an older single, but lamaisa she's ready to get married. So already at that point in time, like approaching up to bagros, she's already preparing herself for marriage. So she doesn't need a year in which to go ahead and prepare her tachshitin because she's already engaged in that process leading up to Bagros. Quite fascinating. Meisvei, Bagra, Hari, Ketvua. Yet again, the Brisa says, a Bogeres, she is like a Tvua. Both remember again, Tvua is Tava. Tava millions is when the husband says, like, let's plan the wedding. My love, Ketvua de Basula. Is he not saying that ultimately, again, she's like a tavua de basula? Or I was supposed to see, tavua literally means the word proposition, but it doesn't mean it like in an inappropriate way. It means that Lamaisa, the husband, is asking her, like, let's get ready for the wedding. To which the Gemara says, lo, kitvua da almana. No, it doesn't mean she's like a basula, but rather it means she's like a woman whose husband was tava, right? Ultimately, again, said, let's get married, but she's an almana. Okay, therefore 30 days. So Tashma, so says, this is Rav Huna's idea. Rav Huna's idea that a bogeres, because she's anticipating imminent marriage, so she's been preparing her tachshitin. Therefore, halacha lemaisa, she's only given 30 days. Now, remember, again, I will say, just to be clear, because I think this was a novel idea for us in yesterday's daf. The clock starts when? When he asks her, say, let's plan the wedding celebration. Remember, again, not from Erisin. That's the great chiddush over here. Erisin could have happened. In other words, so you could have a situation. I just want to point out, we've been working with the classic model that there's a year between Erisin and Isuin. That's because we've been assuming that what? When is the husband tovea, right? When does he tell his wife, let's plan the wedding? We assume. When does he tell his wife, let's plan the wedding celebration? Right after Erisin. So that's why, but again, I just want to point out, like, you could have 2 years between Erisin and Isuin, right? So Lamaisa, again, they have Erisin. He only says, let's plan the wedding a year after Erisin. You have 2. Okay, good. So says the Gemara. So Tashma. Bogeres shesha sashnei masar chodesh. If you have a bogeres, ultimately, again, after Erisin, that waited 12 months. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Hol v'chayiv baila b'mzonoseha, yafer. Now, both say, let me add in one more piece. Now, the truth is, Chazal obviously did not want prolonged Erisin. It's not a good idea. So I do want to point out that, remember, although you could have up to 2 years, you could have more than that, in between Erisin and Isuin, let's be clear. What does kick in 1 year on the 1 year anniversary of Erisin? What does kick in? Support. So remember again, there is a motivation to obviously, again, have Nisuin, because Lamaisa, come a year after Erisin, husband is supporting his wife regardless. So at least with Mazonos, right? So Lamaisa, there is an incentive. In any event, the Gemara says as follows. So Rabbi Elazar says, after a year, Yafer, since a husband is chayiv in Mazonos, he also has the power of annulment over her vows. Ema, Bogeres v'sheshas hashnei masar chodesh. The Gemara says, say that we're talking about a case of a Bogeres who waited 12 months. So the Gemara says, so you see over here that what it sounds like Lamaisa, that even if she's a Bogeres, there is the ability to wait. So Tashma, Hama Are says habesula, if a man does Erisin with a basula, bein shetava habal v'hi ma'akevas, whether the husband says, let's plan the wedding, and she delays, bein shetavahi ubal ma'akev, or she says, let's get married, and he delays, nosnin la shnei masar chodesh mishas tevia. Ultimately, she has 12 months from the time that he asked her to go ahead and plan the celebration. Avalo mishas erisin. Oh, so we'll say here it's explicit, right? The Mishnah wasn't this explicit. Here it's explicit. The 12-month clock does not begin from erisin; it begins from tevia. Bagra, we'll say once she becomes a bogeres, harehi kitvua. Ultimately, again, it's as if she has been propositioned, right? It's as if ultimately, again, he has asked her to go ahead and plan the wedding. Okay, so what does that mean? Ketzad, bagra yomecha v'niskatsha. If a girl became a bogeres even just for 1 day and then had kiddushin, nosnin la shnei masar chodesh, we give her 12 months. Ula arusa shloshim yom. And for an arusa, 30 days. So I both say, that last phrase, we don't know what that means. But we'll get to that in just a second. But here's what I do know. Tiyufta de Rav Huna tiyufta. I both say, that last phrase effectively refutes Rav Huna. Because what was Rav Huna saying? Rav Huna was positing that halacha l'maisa, a bogeres is treated like an almana. And therefore again, so remember again, girl becomes a bogeres, has erisin. A few days later, her husband says, okay, let's plan the wedding celebration. How long does the bogeres have now to plan her wedding? How long? 30 days. 30 days. Rav Huna wanted to say because a bogeres is like an almana. And again, what was Rav Huna's logic? That a girl, as she's approaching Bagros, knows that marriage is imminent. So she's going to begin the preparations already before the chassan comes on the scene. So therefore, she only needs 30 days. Or else, however, this last line of the Brisa says explicitly, Bagra yom echa v'niskacha nosnin la shnei masar chodesh. So we'll say the Brisa effectively refutes Rav Huna, and it's not true. A bogeres is treated like any any basula, any basula, and therefore halacha lamaisa, she is given 12 months from the time that her husband asks her to actually plan the celebration. Beautiful. Ma'avel arusa shloshim yom. Rabbi say, what about that last phrase? And arusa gets 30 days. What is that? Amra papa achi kamar bogeres she'avru Allah shnema sar chodesh bebagrus v'niskadsha nosnin la shloshim yom ke'almana. Okay, so there is one exception, says the Gemara. If you have a girl, a bogeres, who's been a bogeres for a year, right? 13 and a half years old. So I will say 13 and a half years old already again. So look, in Talmudic times already, that would have been a girl it's that she's unmarried already, right? So our older single. So we'll say, so Lamaisa, that may be the exception case. When a girl has been in Bagrus for already a year, at that point in time, we assume that she has been working on preparing herself for marriage, right? All the tachshitin and everything. So a girl who's been a bogeres for a year, who then has kiddushin, baruch Shem mazel tov, right? Then what happens? Then when the husband is tovea her, then what? She only has 30 days. So in a we'll call it in a regular case of bogeres, which is a girl just turned a bogeres or has been a bogeres for a little bit of time, she's treated just like a basula. But halacha lemaisa, if she's been a bogeres for over a year, at that point in time she's treated like an almona. Incredible. Higias manvalonisu. So I will say, now remember again, the Mishnah said, if now the time to get married comes, actual like wedding celebration, now they don't get married, support clause is triggered, and husband has the obligation to go out and support his wife. And I will say, not only that, but remember, halacha l'maisa, if the husband is a Kohen, she is entitled to eat truma as well. So now we're going to discuss a little bit about the halachos of an arusa consuming truma, which is really quite fascinating. So Amra Ula, Dvar Torah, Arusa bas Yisrael ocheles betruma, shene'emar v'kohen ki yikne nefesh kinyan kaspo, v'hainami kinyan kaspo. So we'll say, so Ula says, let's be clear on one thing. Midda oraisa, Ruvain is mekadesh Rachel, right? How do you affect kiddushin? How do you affect kiddushin? Excellent, good, right? So we'll say, so now Ruvain does kiddushin with Rachel. Reuben does kiddushin with Rachel. So we'll say, so now Ula says, midda oraisa, she is entitled to eat truma now, as an arusa. What's the logic? Because I will say again, what entitles you to eat truma? One of two things. Either, number one, you're a Kohen, or number two, you're kinyan kaspo, which I will say literally means you're acquired by the Kohen. Now I will say, now technically speaking, right, the mechanism of erusin, and let's just use kesef as the paradigmatic example. A man gives a woman an item of value, all right, we use a ring, but it could be any item of value, right, and ultimately, again, he's kona her. He's kona her, not an ownership piece, but a responsibility piece. In other words, so there's a kinyan that occurs there. So after erusin already, the wife is kinyan kaspo of the husband. If that's the case, really she's entitled to eat truma after erusin. So why doesn't she? Matam amru, eino ochala. So why do we see that during erusin? Because I want to be clear, everyone agrees that during erusin, the wife, Rachel, does not eat truma, right? It's only after a year, if they're still not married, the support clause is triggered. But why is it that Lamaisef midda oraisa, she's entitled to eat truma even after erusin? Why not? The most is incredible. Shema yimzegulo kos b'vei sabia v'tashke lachal lachayosa. Because we'll say, what are we concerned about? Remember, during erusin, where is Rachel living? Where is Rachel living? In her father's house. Her father's Yisrael. So we're concerned that if her chassan is giving her truma, she's going to end up bringing it home and sharing it with her family. Now we'll say a Yisrael, and by the way, not in a malicious way, but remember again, a Yisrael consuming truma is a significant infraction. If that's the case, he gives Mavalonisu Nami Hasus Nami. So we'll say, so if that's the case, I don't understand. If that's the concern, which is a legitimate concern, so why? So now, let's fast forward. A year goes by after erusin. Reuben still hasn't married Rachel. What's the halacha? He's obligated to support her, and she's entitled to truma if he's a Kohen. Why doesn't that same concern exist then? To which the Gemara says, Hasam duchta miyachid la. So we'll say, this is interesting. So we'll say, in that case, halacha l'maisa, after a year and the support clause is triggered, he dedicates a space for her in his home for her to eat. Look at Rashi. Miduchta miyachidla me'achar shuzan osatamid motzia mibesaviha umiyachidla makom shel tafsid mizonosav lechalkom lekrovah. Shabbos said this is very interesting. If after a year they're still not married, and he is going ahead and supporting her, right? The support clause is triggered. So Rashi says at that point in time, what he would do is give her own living quarters. He would give her own living quarters. So because he has to sustain her, right, and because he'd be sustaining her through truma, he would give her own living quarters. Because she would be given her own living quarters, there's no concern that she's going to go back to her father's home and go ahead and share the truma. Interesting. To which the Gemara says, Elamiata, lokit koin li Yisrael, lo leichel b'truma, dilma asu lemeichel bahadei. Therefore, I will say, if that's the case, then if halacha l'maisa Yisrael hires a Kohen worker, right? The Kohen worker, lokit Kohen Yisrael, Yisrael. So we'll say, so ultimately, I hire a worker to harvest my wheat, and ultimately, again, he is a Kohen. So such an arrangement should be aser. After all, again, lo leichel b'truma dilma asu lemeichel bahadei. Should we be concerned and tell that Kohen, listen, whatever you do, don't bring any truma for your lunch to work, right? Don't bring any truma to work. In other words, work is my house. He's coming to harvest my wheat. Shouldn't we be concerned that maybe if he brings his truma, he's going to end up sharing his truma with me, his Yisrael employer? To which the Gemara says, no, that doesn't make any sense. Hashta midido sapala midide achli. We'll say the whole obligation of an employer, right? Part of this is the case of a sachir. So part of the obligation that I have in a sachir is what? To provide him with lunch, to provide him with meals. So Lamaisa, I, the employer, am obligated to provide him with meals. There's no concern that the employee, therefore, is going to share his food with me, the Yisrael employer. Okay, so we'll say, so this is the position of Ula. So Ula Halach Lamaisa holds that ultimately, again, even though Mid'oraisa and Arusa is permitted to eat Truma, Midrabanan, we don't allow her. Why? Out of a concern, she's going to take her truma, go back to her father's home and share it with her family. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda Amar Bishum Simphon. So Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda says, no, there's another issue. The issue is not because of sharing. The issue is Simphon. Now we'll say, what's Simphon? Look at Rashi. Mishum Simphon. Huda Amar Arusa lo tochal truma ache yagiez man shechayim zonosel. V'loshon Simphon hu bitol. We will say Simphon means that we're concerned that he's going to discover some type of disqualifying circumstance that is going to go ahead and cause him to void the relationship. See, I will say Simphon is not saying he's going to find something he doesn't like and divorce her, because that happens, and that's fine. If she was eating truma up until now, she was married to him. Simphon means we're concerned about the discovery of something that could lead to a voiding of the relationship. Now, both say, what happens if you void the relationship? That undermines or that uproots the relationship lemafre, retroactively. It turns out they were never married. Therefore, the concern is like this. The concern is, I will say, if during Erisin, Rachel's eating truma, and then let's say Ruvain discovers, we're going to see the classic case of Simphon, I will say, is Rashi says, Kigon, Shover ha'mevatel shtar kari Simphon, umum be'isha b'mehema. So I'll say the classic example would be some type of physical blemish. So it could be some type of physical defect. It could also be she concealed an illness or something else. But Lamaisa Simphon means he discovers, we'll call it a mum for now, right? She discovers some type of mum where he says, listen, had I known that you possess this mum, I would have never married you. You know, there are tshuvas like this. The Moshe has a tshuva like this, where he discusses that a man and woman got married, and the husband concealed that he had cancer. He didn't tell her. He didn't tell the kala. Didn't tell the kala. So the kala said, Arvis Yarbrogan said, look, had I known this, I would not have married you. So Moshe Paskin in that situation that it is a voidable marriage. Because obviously, again, let's say if they get married and the guy turns out the chassan has a chronic bad breath, so Lamaisa that's not a voidable. That's not get a Listerine strip. That's not a voidable thing. But Lamaisa something significant felt was ultimately again voidable. So I'm just pointing out this concept does apply in halacha, but we'll see more cases like this. But Lamaisa, that's Simphon. So Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda holds that halacha Lamaisa, ultimately, because of Simphon, we're concerned that he might discover some type of mum about her, and therefore halacha l'maisa void the marriage. Therefore, we don't want her consuming truma during Erusin, out of a concern that it may turn out retroactively she was a Yisraelis with no connection to a Kohen who was eating truma. We assume that ultimately, again, when do we stop worrying about Simphon? When do we stop worrying about it? After the Bia Rishona, right? After they've been intimate with one another, right? She's seen him, he's seen her, and therefore, again, there's no concern about anyone voiding anything over any type of mum. So therefore, the Gemara says, so if that's the case, by the way, says Rav Shlomo Yehuda, the truth is, normally we've been accustomed to thinking, when does a woman eat truma? When can she eat truma according to everyone for the first time? After the chuppah. So I will say, in other words, that let's say halacha l'maisa, if Reuben is a Kohen, marries Rachel, they have the chuppah, right? We could assume that the wedding su'uda, they could serve truma. So when they're only inviting elitist group, they're only inviting their Kohanic friends, right? So we'll go ahead, we'll make a truma shmorg, right? All the truma you could eat, right? So l'maisa again, I would, based on this, that should be usher, because chuppah shouldn't be enough. There should have to be the bir rishona, to which the Gemara says, "Sahasam mivdak badikla v'hadir ma'ayla." So I'll say we're going to talk about this. That sometimes what a man does is he goes ahead and he asks his female relatives to see what they could find out about the kala, right? To see what they could find out about the kala, right? Maybe they go to the gym together or whatever else, So he's not concerned that there's anything too crazy going on, and therefore after the chuppah, ultimately again it's permitted. To which the Gemara says, "Elamiata eved kohen shalakach mi Yisrael lo leichal b'truma mishum simphon." If that's the case, then I will say again, what about the case of an eved of a Kohen that he purchased from a Yisrael should also not eat truma because of simphon? Maybe again the Kohen will discover some type of mum in his eved which would render him unfit and therefore again unable to eat truma. So Gemara says that doesn't make sense. Simphon ba'avadim laka. There's no real such concept of simphon by avadim. Why? This is fascinating. The ime avrai hakachazile. If we're talking about a mum that the eved has on the outside externally, so the master will see it. V'i digavoy. If it's a mum that's clothed or that's covered, l'malacha kavai, who cares, right? The adon needs the eved not for his aesthetic appeal, but rather again for his ability to work. So the Gemara says, v'shabaseiser lo ichpas lo, anything that's hidden, the master doesn't care about. Nimsa ganav o kubiustus. So we'll say if it turns out that the eved is a ganav, a thief, or a kidnapper, higio. No surprises there. In other words, Rabbi say, what does that mean? Avadim were generally considered to be kind of like the lower grouping of society. So therefore, again, if I find out that my Eved ultimately, again, is not of the upper echelon of society, right? So he's a thief or he's a former kidnapper. Higio, I know there's going to be something about my Eved. Higio means that the sale stands. The sale stands. So Ma'ika, so what other possibilities could there be? Listim mizuyim, maybe it was an armed robber. And I will say, here's what's interesting. So finding out that my Eved is an armed robber is much more significant, right? That's actually a potentially voidable transaction. Why? Because that puts my life in danger. In other words, as the master, I would not want someone like that in my employ. O muchtav l'malchus. We'll say muchtav l'malchus. Ultimately, again, it means someone who sinned against the government and therefore is liable to death. You don't want to employ that kind of guy because that's like harboring a fugitive. So maybe that's the concern. That's not a concern either. Why? Hano koles. Both say people know about that stuff, right? If someone has been condemned to death by the government or someone was listed mizuyin, right, an armed robber, so people know about those things. So there's no concern that you're going to find out about that later on. So the Gemara says, fine. So the Gemara says, here's the issue. Michti. So we'll say, here's our machlokes. Here's what's fascinating. Everyone agrees that Narusa is not going ahead and eating truma, right? There's no machlokes on that. What's the machlokes? Ula says it's because of a concern that during Erusin she's living at home, and she's going to go ahead and take the truma back to her family. That's problematic. Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda says, simphon. We're concerned about the discovery of a mum, which could ultimately lead to the annulment of the marriage. Says the Gemara. So, bein lamar lo achla. Either way, right? Either way, halacha lemaisa, she's not eating truma during Erusin. So, what's the nafkamina between the two opinions? So, the Gemara says, Ika benayu, kibel, masar, bahalach. So, both say the three cases that are the nafkaminas. If you take a look at Rashi, right across in Rashi, kibel, masar, bahalach, kibel, alav, baal, es, hamumin, l'simphon. So let's say the husband says, I love you so much, I accept you with all of your mumin, whatever the ones I know, the ones I don't know. Okay, so if it's about mumin, there's no simphon, there's no longer an issue. But lamais again, if it's about going to her father's home, there still is an issue. Next case, masar. Rashi says, ha'av, l'shluchi habal, o shalch shluchav shabosai. So a case of masar. So if the father gave the rachel over to the agents of the husband, in that case, Rachel is no longer living at home, so therefore there's no concern that she's going to share truma with her family, but there's still a concern of simphon. And last case, ultimately, I will say of halach, of ha'ushahalchu. So halach is the same case, right? She went with the agents of the Baal. So we'll say in those cases, she's removed from the father's home. So therefore the concern of sharing truma with her family has been obviated, but lamaisa, the concern of simphon still exists. But I will say, the good news, so just we're going to see, by the way, both of these reasons keep playing out in the sugyas, but it's just important from the halachic perspective, halacha lemaisa, everyone is in agreement that ultimately, again, once that during Erusin, even though mid'oraisa, she is entitled to truma, midrabanan, we don't let her eat. Either, again, because of ula, she may share with her family, Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, simphon may discover a mum. But I will say, what else does everyone agree with? That after a year elapses, and they still haven't gotten married, what's triggered? Support clause. And then at that point, then what happens? Now she could eat truma. So here we go. So remember again, after 1 year, so now let's go through this. After 1 year, she's allowed to eat truma. And the Gemara did introduce to us that it's possible that after that time, he may be obligated to go ahead and provide her with a separate living quarters, according to Ula, so that she's not taking anything back to her family. Now here's what was interesting in the Mishnah. So we had a machlokes. Now that he's supporting her after a year, how much of her support is made up of truma and how much of her support is made up of chulin? So remember again, this was a machlokes. So I just want to point out, I just want to quote you from the Mishnah. Rabbi Tarfon said, hakol truma. Rabbi Tarfon says she is supported fully from truma. Rabbi Akiva said, half chulin, half truma. That was the machlokes. So we'll say, here we go. Says the Gemara. So Rabbi Tarfon Omer, no snah kol truma. Amr Abaye. Machlokes bebas kohen lekohen. They will say the machlokes is when there is a bas kohen who is marrying a kohen. That's the machlokes. So you got Rabbi Tarfon saying you support her all from truma. Rabbi Akiva says half truma, half chulin. Aval bebas Yisrael lekohen. But if it's a bas Yisrael marrying a kohen, divrei hakol mechzo chulin umechzo truma. So we'll say, let me just take a step back for a moment. What's happening over here? Remember, there is no such thing as a Kohen, or for that matter, a wife of a Kohen, who is always eating truma. Even no matter how much you love truma and you're a Kohen, why not? Why not? People become tamei. So we'll say, what happens? Let's say you're a Kohen, and all you have in your house is truma. So what do you do if you're tamei? What do? You sell truma. Who can you sell truma to? Other Kohanim. Which means that by definition, generally, chulin is fascinating. Chulin usually did not catch the same price on the open market as chulin. And the reason for that is because you have a much smaller market. So the Kohen purchaser knows that, listen, you can't move truma. It's hard to move truma, right? Because Lamaisi, you have such a limited population. So often truma was sold at a discount. So we'll say, see, here's what's interesting. So Abaye says, the machlokes Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon saying the Arusa gets full support from truma. Rabbi Akiva saying she gets half chulin, half truma. That's a bas kohen who's marrying a kohen. Because we'll say, bas kohen is used to dealing with truma. She knows how to, right? She knows what to do. But a bas Yisrael who's marrying a kohen, we'll say, everyone agrees she gets half chulin and half truma. Then I will say, what's the reason for that? Because halacha l'maisa, she's not used to dealing with truma. So therefore, again, we want to give her enough support so if she is timeah, she has what to eat already now without having to sell off anything. Abaye says, machlokes ba'arusa. Furthermore, the machlokes is by an arusa. Aval b'nesua, divrei hakol mechsa chulin u'mechsa truma. So Abaye says, the machlokes Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Tarfon is only by an arusa. But by an asua, everyone agrees an asua gets half chulin, half truma. They both say, what's the logic behind that? Abaye suggests like this. A husband doesn't want his wife to have to go out to the marketplace to sell off truma in order to be able to sustain herself. So therefore, by definition, a husband gives his wife half truma, half chulin. This way, if and when she is timeya, halacha lamaisa, she has what to eat readily available. Fascinating. So that supports this. Rabbi Tarfon Omer Nostin La called truma. Rabbi Tarfon says a man, a Kohen, gives his wife complete truma. Rabbi Akiva Omer Mechza Chulinu Mechza truma. Rabbi Akiva says half and half. That was the Medar Murim. When is this so? The Bas Kohen the Kohen. So I will say this machlokes is when a Bas Kohen is marrying a Kohen. Ava Bas Yisrael a Kohen. But if it's a Bas Yisrael is marrying a Kohen, I will say who is not used to dealing with truma. Divrei hakol mechza chulin u'mechza truma. Everyone agrees that it's a Bas Yisrael marrying a Kohen. Everyone agrees her support is made up of half truma, half chulin. Half chulin. So we'll say again, this gives her the ability to properly navigate even when she's tameya. Furthermore, when is this so? Barusa. Aval b'nesua divrei hakol mechza chulin u'mechza truma. So we'll say furthermore, when is the machlokes? When is the machlokes? Let's say again between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. In the case of a Bas Kohen who marries a Kohen, that's only during Erisin. But during Nisuin, Rabbi Osai, a husband always gives his wife half chulin, half truma. Why? Because he doesn't want his wife to have to suffer the potential indignity of having to take produce, go out to the marketplace, sell it off, and purchase chulin. This way, again, during nisuin, during marriage, she has everything she needs readily available. Incredible. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, "No law shtei yodos shel truma va'acha shel chulin." So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira comes along and says the ratio is different: 2/3 truma to 1/3 chulin. 2/3 truma to 1/3 chulin. Good. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda says, "No laha kol truma." Rabbi Yehuda says, "No, she gets all truma." V'himo cheres v'lo kachas b'damim chulin. And it will say again. So once again, this pretty much aligns also with Rabbi Tarfon. She gets all truma, and she goes out. This again, what happens when she's tameya? Okay, what every other Kohen does. You go and you take your chulin, your truma, you sell it off, and you buy chulin. So we'll say, now watch this. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer kol makom shehuskara truma no snila kiflayim bechulin. So we'll say this is fascinating. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that halacha l'maisa, whenever you have a situation of a woman being supported with truma, she gets twice as much truma as she would chulin. Right? Fascinating. Twice as much truma as she would chulin. Look at Rashi. So Rashi says over here, no snila truma kifayim bechulin, almost right across in Rashi. Kasavar lo matrichina lemachra b'shaviyah. Both say, what's the chap? If you have twice as much truma, what does that allow you to do? You can just sell it off, even if you have to sell it. See, if you could sell off your truma at a steep discount, the good news is that what? It'll sell quickly. So Rabbi Huda holds that. Rabbi Shimon holds that if a man is supporting his wife through truma, he gives her twice as much truma. This way, even if she has to sell it, which again, ideally, a man doesn't want his wife to have to go into the marketplace to sell produce to provide for her own sustenance. But like this, if she has an incredible volume of it, she could sell it, and she could sell it cheap. And because she sells it cheap, she'll be able to sell it quickly, and she'll have what she needs in order to go ahead and support herself. Now, I both say, here's what's interesting. Both according to Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, ultimately, again, she's selling, right? She's only supported by truma. So what's the nafkamina? My benayu. What's the nafkamina? Ultimately, again, between Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Shimon. So Ika benayu tircha. We'll say the nafkamina is tircha. In other words, do we require the woman to exert herself in order to sell the truma to make money to purchase chulin? According to Rabbi Huda, the answer is yes. According to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the answer is no. That's why we'll just give her twice as much truma so she could sell whatever she needs to sell at a discount, sell it quickly, get what she needs, and come back home. Good. Hayavam eno machel b'truma. So let's remember again, the Mishnah said, a yavam does not entitle his Yavama to go and eat Truma. So just to play this out, just to clarify the case. Ruvain does Erisin with Rachel. Okay, so let's assume right now a day goes by, 2 days go by. Ruvain says to Rachel, let's get married. So now again, the clock begins. Ruvain dies. Rachel falls to Erisin to Shimon. Shabbos said the Mishnah was teaching us that halacha l'maisa, even if so now let's say Shimon's not ready to do Yibum yet. So now a year goes by. A year since either, let's call it a year from Erisin, because this is about support. That's the truth. So a year since Reuven did Erisin now elapses. Rachel still can't go ahead and eat Truma. In other words, attachment to the Yavam, even though the Yavam is a Kohen, does not go ahead, what we'll call the Zika. I haven't used that word in a while, right? The Zika does not go ahead and entitle her to eat Truma. So says the Gemara, my time, Kinyan Kasbam Rachman of a high Kinyan Da'achifu. I will say, because Lamaisa, remember, the operative phrase by Truma consumption is Kinyan Kaspo, someone who is acquired by the Kohen. The Yavam, now after the Yavam does Yibum, then ultimately again he quote unquote acquires his wife. But right now, when she's a Shomeres Yavam waiting for Yibum, there's a Zeka, but that Zeka does not, she is still the Kinyan Kaspo of her deceased husband of Ruvain, and not the Kinyan Kaspo of the Yavam. Therefore no Truma. Asta Shisha Chadash Mipnei Abal. So we'll say, so remember again, the Mishnah gave a couple of different scenarios. If let's say again she was in Erisin for 6 months to Ruvain, and then waiting for Yibum for 6 months to Shimon, ultimately again she can't go ahead and eat Truma. So the Gemara says, Hashta Bifnei Bal Amrit Lo, Bifnei Yavam Mibai, Zu Ve'ein Zu ve'ein tzarech lomar zu katani. So we'll say you're right. In other words, because the Mishnah gave a case of like she did the year minus a day with Ruvain and then 1 day shemeres yavam. She still can't eat truma. Or she did a year with Ruvain, her husband, and then the rest of the year waiting for yibum. So we'll say the Gemara says, if the majority of the time is with the husband, then she still can't eat truma. It's obviously the majority of the time was with the yom. She also can't eat truma. To which the Gemara says, "Einachinami." There is a stylistic piece in the Mishnah called "Zu ve'in tzarech lomar zu." Sometimes the Mishnah says something and it doesn't need to say it because it's obvious, but it just included it in order to create a sense of textual symmetry. Incredible. So Zu Mishnah Rishona. So remember again, how did the Mishnah end? The Mishnah, see, the first iteration of the halacha, I will say, was what? That a woman, after a year of Erisin, is permitted to eat truma, right? Then there was a second iteration of the halacha, right? The lashon of the Mishnah was Beis Din Shel Acharei, and a subsequent Beis Din said no. A woman could only eat truma when Ad Shetikanes L'chuppah. So now I will say, which is like the halacha l'maisa for us. Halavayim should be the halacha l'maisa again for us, but Karov. We'll say so. Ultimately, again, so the second Beis Din said there is never truma consumption during Erisin. Truma consumption only occurs after chuppah. So let's analyze. Says the Gemara, my taima, why did they change the halacha? So Amar Ulavitim Rav Shlomo Bar Yehuda Mishum Simphon. Interesting. I will say, so the second Beis Din felt the issue of Simphon. I will say, let's go back. What's Simphon? The discovery of a mum. I will say, but I want to, because we're going to get into this. The discovery, it's not just the pshat that a husband could say any mum. I don't like this, I don't like that. So again, Simphon, we're going to do this sugya. But simple means something of significance. So the Beis Din Shacharayim were concerned that Lamaisa, he may discover a mum that he feels allows him to void the marriage, in which case any truma consumption during Erisin retroactively would turn out to be truma consumption by Yisraelis. So that's why they voided it. So which the Gemara says, so now let's analyze this. So according to Ula, this makes sense. According to Ula, Beis Din originally thought the issue was that she may come to eat truma in her parents' home. And then the subsequent Beis Din said, no, the issue is because of simfo. That makes sense. Ella, we'll say Amadeus, Ella, L'Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Kamaisi Mishum Simphon, Ubas Raisa Mishum Simphon, my Benayu. But I will say, but 1 second, according to Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda felt that the initial concern was simphon. If that's the case, what changed between the Beis Din Rishon and the Beis Din Achrona? They both seem to be concerned for the same simphon, to which the Gemara says, Ikabenayo bedikas chutz. They will say the machlokes would have been what we call, we'll say, bedikas chutz. Bedikas chutz means like a superficial inspection. As well, so we're going to see that one of the things that a chassan often does is just to ensure that there's no mum. He'll ask his female relatives who may have been in close proximity to his kala, like, is there anything I should be concerned about? That's called a bedikas chutz. It's called a bedikas chutz, right? They're not searching her body, right? They're not going ahead. It is not, So lemaisa, can you rely on bedikas chutz? So apparently, again, I will say, in the first iteration of the halacha, mar savar bedikas chutz. Mar savar bedikas chutz shma bedika. One opinion said this kind of superficial bedika was enough. Umar savar bedikas chutz lo shma bedika. So the shaila was, the machlokes was, is bedikas chutz enough to avoid a simphone possibility? Originally, they felt yes, and later on they said no. Good. So we'll say, so bottom line for our purposes, what comes out? So really, it's a fascinating progression. So we'll say, here's the progression. Mid'araisa, an arusa is permitted to eat truma. Why? Kinyan kaspo. Mid'araisa. So we'll say now, first iteration of the halacha, she can't eat truma. Why? Machlokes ula, Rosh Bar Yehuda. Ula, she may take some back home. Rosh Bar Yehuda, simphone. They will say, second Beis Din then said the truth is, an arusa doesn't eat truma. Done. When is a woman permitted to eat truma? Only when? After chuppah. After nisuin. And I will say, it seemed to be that what really motivated that Beis Din Sheni, that second Beis Din, was simphone. We have to be concerned that maybe again he's going to discover something that's void, that allows him to void the marriage. And I will say, remember again, all of this is based on the fact that the stakes are quite high for a Yisrael who even unwittingly consumes truma. So therefore, again, in order to just sidestep this entire issue, Chazal said no truma during Erusin, only after chuppah. Incredible. Mishnah. Hamakdish ma'aseh yedei ishto. So it was a very interesting case. So let's say a man goes out and says, right, Reuven's married to Rachel, and he says, remember again, a man is entitled to his wife's ma'aseh yadayim, he's entitled to his wife's earnings. We're going to discuss exactly why that is, right, what that's based on. So the Gemara said, let's say a man goes ahead and says, whatever my wife produces, ultimately again is hektish. Now we'll say, Rashi points out over here, we're going to see, Masnisim mefarish mahi oselo mishkol chamish shlom. We're going to say that, interestingly enough, a woman is obligated to go ahead and produce a certain amount, which brings in a certain amount of money to the household. We'll discuss what that is, why that is. We'll get into all of this. But right now, what the Gemara is saying is like this. So a man says, I'm being makdish my wife's earnings. Whatever it is that she brings in with her hands, ultimately, again, I'm being makdish it. What's the halacha? Harezu osa va'ochelas. So we'll say, in other words, the halacha is that ultimately, again, literally, again, she could produce and utilize that which she's producing, which is another way of saying his hektish doesn't work. That is a meaningless statement for a man to be makdish the earnings of his wife. Okay, hamosar. They will say, what about additional amounts? They will say, we're going to see additional amounts represent those amounts above and beyond what she is obligated to bring into the household. Rabbi Meir Omer Hekdish. Rabbi Meir says it's Hekdish. Rabbi Yochanan Sandler Omer Chulin. Rabbi Yochanan Sandler says no, it's Chulin as well. Again, so we'll discuss exactly what these halachas are. So we'll say, let's analyze. Amar Rav Huna. Amar Rav. Yicholi isha lomar lebayla eni nizonos ve'eni osa. We'll say, listen, as Rav Huna said the name of Rav, a woman could say to her husband, listen, don't support me, and I'm not giving you my earnings. So I'll say, remember, we actually spoke about this. I just want to point out that lemaisa, you could have a situation like this. How? Let's say the woman has her own career, right? She makes a lot of money. So she says, listen, I don't want to intermingle my finances with yours. So lemaisa, eni nizonos ve'eni osa. Thank you. You could keep your mizonos, and I'll keep my earnings. And I both say, now, this is very important. Because the lashon is very important. She's saying to him, eni nizonos, you don't have to support me. And because you don't have to support me, therefore what? I'm not giving you my earnings. What do you see from this? Kasavar, so we'll say, Rav Huna holds, Kitakinu Rabbanon Mizoni Iker, Umaisi Adem Mishum Ema. So we'll say, Eva. So we'll say, listen to this. According to Rav Huna's understanding, here's how this works. The Iker Takana that Chazal made was, a husband is obligated to support his wife. That's the obligation. Now, in order to go and offset the cost of support, what did Chazal say? A husband gets his wife's earnings. And that's there to avoid animosity, because there was a concern that if the husband has the obligation to support his wife, and what? The wife gets to keep all of her own earnings. It's like, what's going on over here? I have the obligation to support, and you don't have an obligation to offset the cost of the household. So therefore, I will say, but again, the ikar takana is that a husband has an obligation to support his wife. Mizonos, right? To offset that and avoid animosity, Chazal gave him her earnings. Therefore, V'chi amra eni mizonos ve'ena osar shus biyada. Sefer Rabosai, mizonos is something that benefits the woman, right? This is something made for her benefit, and therefore halacha l'maisa, and her earnings are there to offset that benefit, and therefore halacha l'maisa, if she goes out and she says to her husband, "Thank you, but no thank you, thank you, but no thank you," she is permitted to waive the right to mizonos. But because she has waived the rights, therefore what? Therefore halacha l'maisa, she gets to keep her earnings. Okay, good. So we'll say, watch this. Meisvei, tiknu mizonos tachas ma'aseh yadeha. Wow. So we'll say, listen to this. So the Brisa says differently. The Brisa says, Chazal instituted mizonos because he gets the rights to her earnings. So we'll say, in this version, really what happened? What's the takana? The takana is, husband is entitled to his wife's earnings. But 1 second. If you're entitled to your wife's earnings, you have to what? Provide it to support. So I will say, by the way, this is not semantics. This is actually pretty amazing. See, I will say, if you hold that the ikar takana was mizonos, and therefore, again, her earnings were given to him to offset that, the primary takana was to benefit who? The wife. And therefore, again, because it's for her benefit, she could therefore what? Waive it. And if she waives it, she gets to keep her earnings. In the second version, listen to this. The takana was that a husband gets his wife's earnings. It's just, in order to sustain the wife, what has to happen? Ultimately, again, she has to give her mizonos. But the takana was for the husband, and it's for, therefore, again, Abosai, if she chooses to waive mizonos, that's fine. That's her prerogative. But what is she not getting? Her ma'aseh yadeh. This is incredible. Ema, no. Ema, tiknu ma'aseh yadeh tachas mizonos. Rather, we'll say the way to read it, the Gemara says, is that say that ma'aseh yadeh was ultimately given or was instituted tachas mizonos. The Gemara says, no. The ikar takana is mizonos. A husband is obligated to support his wife. So we'll say the truth is, I just want to point out, we saw beforehand that the din of mizonos is da'oraisa. Share, kisus, and ona is a din da'oraisa. So again, we're gonna kind of work this all through, because here the Gemara seems to indicate that mizonos is a takana. Takana means derabanan. We'll sort this out. But l'maisa, for our purposes now, the Gemara says no. The way it works is the takana is mizonos. Takana is mizonos. But once a husband is obligated to give mizonos to his wife, therefore what? After that, he's obligated for ma'aseh yadayim. So let's analyze this. So hamakdish ma'aseh yadei ishto harei osa va'ochelas. So we'll say, what did the Mishnah say? If a man is makdish his wife's earnings, what's the effect of being makdish your wife's earnings? What's the effect? Zero. So the Gemara says, harei osa va'ochelas. My love bin izonis. Are we not talking about a case where Lamaisa, she's being supported by him? Lo be'enon izonis. She's not being supported. Oh, 1 second. If she's not being supported, therefore again, who gets to keep her earnings? She does. Well, obviously, if Reuven is not supporting his wife Rachel, and she's entitled to her earnings, and he says, your earnings are makdish, all right, are hekdish. I'm supposed to say, that's no different than saying, you know what, I heard you got a raise at work, I am hereby makdish your additional earnings, right? I really think I'm only doing what's best for you. I love you. This. I know it's going to hurt me more than it hurts you, but this is what I think is best for you. It's beautiful. It's wonderful, except it doesn't work. You can't be makdish something that belongs to someone else. So I will say, if she's not being supported, and therefore, again, she's entitled to her own ma'aseh yadayim, then of course he can't be makdish or ma'aseh yadayim. To which the Gemara says, afilu man da'amar, so listen to this. Afilu man da'amar, yachal harav lomar le'eved asemi ve'eni zancha. We'll say, there is a possibility of an adon saying to his eved, you have to work for me and I'm not supporting you. Hani mili be'eved kinani. That's only by an eved kinani. Why? The lo ksiv be'imach. Because the pasuk doesn't use lashon of imach, with you. Aval eved ivri dichsiv be'imach lo. But we'll say, but an eved ivri, an adon has no right to go ahead and deprive his Evet Ivri of support. The Gemara says, "V'chol shekein ishto." I will say all the more so one's wife, not to compare one's wife to an Evet Ivri. I will say, but Lamais, again, remember the only level of comparison that's there is that there's a financial piece with both of them. There's a level of financial acquisition with both of them. So also I say, obviously, halacha Lamaisa, if husband is not supporting his wife, right? So of course he can't go ahead and deprive her of her Maisei Adayim. He has no rights to that. To which the Gemara says, right, Seifa Itztrachle. So as we look at the end of the Mishnah, what was the end of the Mishnah? Mosar. So Rabbi says, remember again, the end of the Mishnah dealt with what we call additional earnings. They both say, just for our purposes, additional earnings represent the amounts above and beyond what the woman herself is obligated to bring into the household. So what did the Mishnah say about Mosar? So Meir says Hektish. Meir says it's Hektish. Rabbi Yochanan Sandler Omer Chulin. Rabbi Yochanan Sandler says that it's Chulin upliga de Reish Lakish. And both say they argue Reish Lakish. What does Reish Lakish say? Dem Reish Lakish. Lo tema time Rabbi Meir Mishum dekasavar adam maktish davar shlabali olam. So both says let's analyze this. So now here's what you have. When it comes to the Mosar, Rabbi Meir says it's Hektish. Rabbi Yochanan Sandler says it's Chulin. So now watch this. So says the Gemara, and this argues on Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish says, don't think that the reason of Rabbi Meir is Mishum de Kasavar Adam Makdish Davar Shelo Bali Olam. We'll say, listen to this. So I just want to point out, there's a concept of being, there's a machlokes of Adam Makdish Davar Shelo. Can you consecrate something that is not yet in existence? So you might have thought, says Reish Lakish, that the reason of Rabbi Meir is because he holds Adam Makdish Davar Shelo Bali Olam. Right? A man is consecrating the additional amounts of money his wife will earn. Do those monies exist yet? No. But yet Rabbi Meir says the additional amounts, the surplus amounts, are hektish. So Reish Lakish says, don't think it's because Rabbi Meir holds Makdish Adam Davar Shelo Bali Olam. That's not the reason. Ella, time Rabbi Meir mitoch shiyacha lekofa l'maisi adel. Nase ke'omer la yikadshu yadayich le'osehem. Rather, Rabbi say something very interesting. Rabbi Meir holds that halacha l'maisa. This is actually quite fascinating. That halacha l'maisa, a husband is able to go ahead and compel his wife to work in order to go ahead and acquire her maisei adayim, her earnings. Therefore, the Gemara says it's as if he said to her, "Yikadshu yadayich le'osehem." Literally, again, your hands should be consecrated, not the earnings. Look at Rashi. Lo sehen lemisha bera'an v'yadayim isnehu ba'olam alma kasavar yachol lekofa ve'ini yachol lomar ini zonas ve'ini yosef. So we'll say, what we're going to see according to Reish Lakish is Rabbi Meir really holds that a husband has a right to say to his wife, I'm going to take your earnings. I'm sorry. She's not permitted to say any mizonos ve'eni yosa. A woman cannot waive the right to mizonos. She can't waive the right to mizonos. Now, because she can't waive the right to mizonos, it sounds like therefore what? He's automatically entitled to her earnings. Because he's automatically entitled to her earnings, it means that ultimately, again, he has some level of control over her maisei adayim. When he's makdish the mosar, when he consecrates the additional amount of bosa, he's not consecrating future earnings. What is he really consecrating? Her hands. And her hands are a davar shebali olam, they're in existence. That's why Rabbi Meir holds that the Mosar ultimately, again, can become hektish. So we'll have to stop over here for today. We're going to pick up in the middle of Rabbi Meir. Actually, let's just go quickly. V'sav Rabbi Meir, very quickly. Sorry, Rabbi Meir, Ein Adam Makdish Davar Shelo Bali Olam. Rabbi Meir really hold that a person can consecrate something that's not yet in existence. V'atani, we learn, ha'omer le'isha hari at mekudeshes la'achar she'ezgar la'achar she'tizgari la'achar. So if a man says to a woman, become mikudeshes to me after I convert, or after you convert, or la'achar she'eshdachar la'achar she'eshdachari, or after I'm emancipated or you're emancipated, la'achar she'yamus ba'aleich o she'tamos achasech. That's an interesting one. Become mikudeshes to me after your husband dies. Not now, it's not appropriate to discuss this now, right? But after your husband dies, or I happen to be married to your sister, after your sister dies, or after your yavam does chalitza, Rabbi Meir over mikudeshes. Rabbi Meir says she's mikudeshes. So both say these are all examples of what? Dvarim shelo ba'u li'olam. And yet Rabbi Meir says it works. Rabbi Meir says you can affect change with a davar shebali olam. So both say, what does that tell you? So Rabbi Meir holds you can affect change with davar shebali. You're right. Gemara says you're right. Me'ahi in mehalek lemashmina. Both say from this case you can glean that, but from the case ultimately again of the Mishnah you could not glean it. So therefore, Rabosai, we're not finished, but we finished now with the sugya. What comes out ultimately in Rabosai is halacha l'maisa, fundamental machlokes, and how we view the din of mizonos. Is mizonos the ikar takana? The ikar takana, and therefore again, Maisei Adayim were there to offset it. In which case, because it's for her benefit, she could waive it. Or halacha l'maisa, the ikar takana ultimately again was for. The ikar takana ultimately again was for. The ikar takana was for Maisei Adayim, and mizonos are only there to offset that. That machlok is mentioned to be continued. Shkach Avosai. All right, Chevron on Zoom, have a good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos. So wonderful to see everyone. Mercy Yisrael from South Africa. Hashem, have a wonderful day.